The Andes blaze in golden light.
A river of mist pours through a canyon.
Then the falls, Iguazu, thundering over 2 kilometers of raw cliff edge.
A stadium erupts. 50,000 voices become one sound.
Then Buenos Aires at midnight, neon bleeding across wet pavement, a city that refuses to sleep. Underneath it all, a tango melody, low, aching, insistent.
Argentina is not a country you simply visit. It visits you, long after you have left.
Long after the passport is stamped and the luggage is unpacked and the photographs are filed away, somewhere you rarely look. This is a land of staggering scale. From Aconcagua, the highest peak in the entire Americas, to Ushuaia, the southernmost city on Earth, Argentina stretches across a geography so extreme, so varied, so relentlessly dramatic, that the contrasts alone feel like a story worth telling.
This is that story.
This is a land of extremes and contradictions, and it makes no apologies for either. Argentina gave the world tango, that slow, aching conversation between two bodies. It gave the world Malbec, grown in the shadow of the Andes at altitudes that should make wine impossible. And it gave the world Diego Armando Maradona, a man who touched the ball with the hand of God and the foot of a genius in the very same afternoon. But Argentina also gave the world something harder to celebrate. This was once one of the wealthiest nations on Earth, a country people crossed oceans to reach, chasing a future that felt genuinely possible here. And yet it has defaulted on its national debt more times than almost any country in recorded history. The contradictions do not cancel each other out. They are the country. Argentina, heart of the South. Chapter 1. The land.
Watch the map unfold. Every ridge, every river, every vast empty plain stretching across the screen before the real world rushes in to replace it.
Argentina is the 8th largest country on Earth, nearly 2.8 million square kilometers of it. That number is almost too large to hold in your mind, so let the land itself do the explaining. From the steaming subtropical north, where the air is thick and the jungle presses in from every direction, Argentina stretches downward, relentlessly, dramatically, all the way to Tierra del Fuego. The land of fire, a jagged, wind-battered fragment of the world hanging at the very edge of the Antarctic, where the sky turns strange colors and the cold has a personality of its own. This geographic range is not merely a fact to note and move on from, it is the foundation of everything that follows: the people, the culture, the conflicts, and the contradictions that make Argentina unlike anywhere else on Earth. Along Argentina's western spine, the Andes rise in dramatic silence. Climbers ascending Aconcagua at 6,961 meters, the tallest mountain outside Asia, move slowly against a sky so blue it barely seems real. This is the roof of the Americas, a wall of ice and rock that separates Argentina from Chile and defines the country's entire western edge. But descend from those peaks and the land opens into something entirely different. The pampas stretch eastward for hundreds of kilometers, flat, fertile, seemingly endless. This is the engine of Argentina's agricultural wealth, producing beef and grain that once fed half the world. And the pampas gave birth to something else entirely: the gaucho. Part cowboy, part philosopher, entirely Argentine. Watch them lasso cattle at full gallop, moving with a confidence that comes from generations on horseback. As dusk settles, they gather around a fire, passing mate in quiet companionship. Geography here does not just describe land, but it describes people. Continuing northeast, the landscape transforms into something almost impossible. to believe. The Iguazu Falls thunder over a cliff nearly 2 kilometers wide, wider than Victoria Falls, taller than Niagara. When Eleanor Roosevelt first saw them, she reportedly turned to her companions and said simply, "Poor Niagara." Standing at the edge with the mist rising and the roar filling your entire body, you understand exactly what she meant. From there, the geography shifts again, dramatically, quietly. The Northwest Altiplano is a slower, drier, ancient world. Salt flats stretch to the horizon, flamingos wade through shallow mineral lakes, and pre-Columbian stone villages cling to hillsides as they have for thousands of years. Time moves differently here. And so Chapter 1 closes with this thought. Argentina's geography did not simply create scenery. It shaped the people, the economy, and the conflicts that would define this country for centuries to come. Chapter 2, Before Argentina. The camera lingers on the ancient walls of Cueva de las Manos in Patagonia. Hundreds of handprints stenciled in ochre and charcoal press outward from the stone, some 9,000 years old, yet startlingly immediate.
A human hand reaching across millennia.
But the story begins even earlier. Long before any European ship appeared on the horizon, this land was home to peoples who had lived here for at least 13,000 years. They were not one people, but many. In Patagonia, the Mapuche built a world of fierce independence. In the Andes, Quechua speakers wove their lives into the rhythms of altitude and stone. In the lush northeast, the Guarani cultivated the forests and rivers of the region. And in the far south, the Tehuelche roamed the open plains. Their footprints, according to legend, so extraordinarily large that early European explorers named the entire region Patagonia, meaning land of the big feet. Not everyone who came to this land was welcomed. In 1516, Spanish explorer Juan Díaz de Solís sailed into the wide mouth of the Rio de la Plata, the River of Silver, and was killed by the Charrúa people shortly after setting foot ashore. Not a promising start. Spain kept coming regardless. Buenos Aires was officially founded in 1580, positioned as a distant colonial afterthought thousands of kilometers from the silver mines of Peru that actually interested the empire. For over 2 centuries, this corner of South America remained on the margins, a forgotten edge of a vast colonial project, more administrative burden than prize. Then cattle changed everything. The pampas, those endless fertile grasslands, proved extraordinary for livestock. Herds multiplied across the plains, hides and tallow began flowing through the port, and Buenos Aires slowly transformed from a neglected outpost into a city with ambitions far larger than anyone in Madrid had ever intended. With Spain battered and distracted by the Napoleonic Wars, something shifted across Latin America. A collective exhale, a sense that the moment had finally arrived. In Buenos Aires, that feeling crystallized on May 25, 1810, when a junta declared self-rule, severing the daily obedience to a distant crown that had governed life here for over 2 centuries. That date is still celebrated as one of Argentina's most sacred national days, a moment when a city decided it was done waiting for permission. Formal independence from Spain followed 6 years later in 1816, declared in the northwestern city of Tucumán, far from the port that had always considered itself the center of everything. The narrator pauses here, letting the achievement settle before offering a quiet correction. Becoming a country, it turns out, was the straightforward part. Becoming a nation, agreeing on what that nation actually was, who it belonged to, and who got to decide, would take decades of civil war, blood, and argument. Chapter 3. The Making of a Nation. Independence had been declared, but the harder question remained: who gets to decide what Argentina actually is? That argument began in the 19th century, and in many ways it has never stopped. On one side stood the Unitarians, urban, European-influenced, convinced that a strong centralized state led from Buenos Aires was the only path forward. On the other stood the Federalists, regional caudillos, strongmen of the interior, who wanted power distributed away from the capital and back toward the provinces. Into this chaos stepped Juan Manuel de Rosas. Depending on who you ask, he was either a brutal tyrant who ruled through fear and violence, or the only man capable of holding a fractured country together. The narrator pauses here. Both things, it turns out, might be entirely true. Rosas governed Argentina for over 2 decades, and the wounds his era opened would take generations to heal. With Rosas gone, Argentina finally had the framework for something more stable. The Constitution of 1853 established a federal republic, and slowly, deliberately, a modern state began to take shape. Then the immigrants arrived. The music shifts here. Warmer now, layered. Italian accordion, Yiddish strings, Spanish guitars weaving together like voices in a crowded port. Black and white photographs fill the screen, ships heavy with passengers, families gripping bundles containing everything they owned, children squinting into an unfamiliar southern sun. Between 1850 and 1950, roughly 6 million immigrants arrived, Italians above all, reshaping the language and the food and the gestures of everyday life. Spanish families followed. Welsh farmers settled deep in Patagonia and, remarkably, still speak Welsh today. Jewish families fleeing pogroms found refuge here. Lebanese, Syrian, German, and Japanese communities each planted roots, each brought something irreplaceable, and each became, in time, unmistakably Argentine. Buenos Aires had become something the world had rarely seen before, a city where dozens of languages echoed off the same cobblestones. By 1910, it held the largest Jewish population in all of Latin America, alongside Italian neighborhoods, Spanish merchants, and Lebanese traders selling from the same street corners. These communities did not simply coexist, they collided, borrowed, argued, grieved, and eventually created something none of them had brought with them. Not Italian, not Spanish, not anything carried across an ocean in a suitcase, something distinctly, unmistakably Argentine. The homesickness never fully disappeared. It transformed, ambition mixed with longing, and from that tension, a new culture quietly assembled itself in the tenements and port districts of the city. And if you want to understand what that culture felt like from the inside, what it sounded like, what it meant to be caught between the world you left and the world you were building, you need only listen. A full tango piece swells, rich and aching, before settling softly beneath the narration. Tango was born in the late 19th century in the slums and port districts of Buenos Aires and across the river in Montevideo, Uruguay. It was never designed in a concert hall or composed for polite society. It emerged from the streets, from the collision of cultures that the immigrant wave had created. African rhythms carried across the Atlantic through centuries of slavery, Spanish guitar, the Cuban habanera arriving through trade routes, and the European polka all folded into something entirely new. The poor danced it first, in tenement courtyards and smoky bars. The upper classes called it obscene, immoral, a dance too close and too honest for respectable people. Then Paris discovered it, and suddenly everything changed. What Buenos Aires had dismissed, the world desired. Tango swept through Europe, then returned home, and Argentina claimed it completely. Today, in the cobblestone neighborhood of San Telmo, milongas fill the night and street performers dance as if nothing else exists. And from that cultural flowering came something even more extraordinary: prosperity. Archive photographs show Buenos Aires in the early 20th century, grand boulevards lined with European architecture, the Teatro Colón rising like a palace, a port thick with ships from every corner of the world. By 1913, Argentina was one of the 10 wealthiest nations on Earth. Its gross domestic product per capita rivaled France, Germany, and Canada. Beef and wheat poured out of the pampas and into a hungry world. Foreign investment flooded in. The phrase of the era, spoken with genuine admiration across Europe, was as rich as an Argentine. The narrator pauses. The Great Depression struck hard, commodity prices collapsed, and political instability followed close behind. In 1930, the military overthrew an elected government, for the first time, but far from the last. The Golden Age had ended almost before Argentina had fully understood what it possessed. Out of that instability steps one of the most consequential figures in Argentine history. Juan Domingo Perón, a military officer with a gift for reading a crowd, rises through the chaos of the 1940s and wins the presidency in 1946 by a margin that surprises even his opponents. Archive footage captures him at the height of his power. Arms outstretched, voice booming across packed plazas, hundreds of thousands pressing forward just to be near him. He champions the descamisados, the shirtless ones, the workers, and the poor who had never felt the state was theirs. Industries are nationalized, wages rise, and a new political identity is forged. Beside him stands Eva, Evita, a former radio actress from the provinces who becomes something Argentina had never quite seen before. She is fierce, magnetic, and utterly devoted to the poor. When she dies from cancer in 1952, aged just 33, the grief is staggering. She becomes a legend Argentina has never been able to move past. Chapter 5. The Dirty War, the Music Stops. On March 24, 1976, the Argentine military seizes power in a coup. What follows is considered one of the darkest chapters in the entire history of the Americas. The military junta launches what it publicly calls a campaign against subversion. In reality, it is something far more sinister, a systematic, organized campaign of state terrorism directed at its own citizens. People are taken from their homes, their workplaces, and directly off the street, often at night, often by men in plain clothes driving unmarked cars. They are brought to clandestine detention centers where they are tortured, and then they simply vanish. They become known as the desaparecidos, the disappeared. Historians and human rights organizations estimate the number of victims ranges between 10,000 and 30,000 people. Ordinary people, students, teachers, journalists, trade unionists, gone without trial, without charge, without trace. Against this silence, resistance took a quiet but extraordinary form. When the junta banned public protest, a group of mothers did something deceptively simple. They walked. Every Thursday, they circled the Plaza de Mayo in silent procession, each wearing a white headscarf, originally a nappy, a symbol of their missing children, and holding a photograph of a son or daughter who had vanished. They carried no weapons, made no speeches. The regime called them las locas, the mad women. The world called them something else entirely. Their courage became a symbol of human dignity against state terror that echoed far beyond Argentina's borders. The junta ultimately fell in 1983 following its disastrous and humiliating defeat in the Falklands War against Britain. Democracy returned, and then Argentina did something genuinely rare in history. It put its own military leaders on trial. In 1985, General Jorge Rafael Videla and Admiral Emilio Massera were sentenced to life in prison. It was a landmark moment for accountability anywhere in the world. To understand Argentina, you must understand football. It is not a sport here, it is something closer to a religion, complete with its own saints, cathedrals, and miracles. On match days, the country does not merely watch. It prays, argues, weeps, and erupts. The Super Clasico between River Plate and Boca Juniors is widely considered the most intense club rivalry in world football, a fixture that divides families, splits neighborhoods, and stops the nation entirely. But no conversation about Argentine football can go very long before arriving at one name: Diego Armando Maradona. Born in poverty in Villa Fiorito, a shanty town on the southern edge of Buenos Aires, Maradona rises to become arguably the greatest footballer who ever lived, and certainly one of the most complicated human beings the sport has ever produced. He carries within him both the brilliance and the contradiction that Argentina itself seems to embody: extraordinary, flawed, and utterly impossible to look away from. The 1986 World Cup quarter-final between Argentina and England was never just a football match. Played in Mexico City only 4 years after the Falklands War, in which nearly 1,000 people died on both sides, the game carried the weight of unfinished grief and national pride that no referee could manage. Maradona scored twice. The first, punched in with his left fist, he later described as the hand of God. The second was something else entirely, a solo run from his own half, lasting 11 seconds, beating 6 English players before rolling the ball into the net. It is regularly voted the greatest goal ever scored. For Argentines, the narrator explains, that afternoon in the Azteca Stadium was not a victory, it was a reclamation. When Maradona died in November 2020, hundreds of thousands poured into the streets of Buenos Aires. The grief was raw, real, and enormous. A nation mourning the most complicated saint it ever produced. Chapter 7 opens on the streets of Buenos Aires, a Saturday morning market in San Telmo, a couple sharing coffee outside a corner cafe, teenagers weaving through traffic on bicycles beneath enormous murals. The city breathes with a particular energy, restless and creative and stubbornly alive. But the beauty sits alongside serious pain. In December 2001, Argentina's economy collapsed so completely that a president fled the Casa Rosada by helicopter as crowds gathered below. The country defaulted on nearly $100 billion of debt, the largest sovereign default in history at the time. It would not be the last. Inflation recently topped 200% annually. Ordinary Argentines watched their savings dissolve in real time. In 2023, voters elected Javier Milei, a libertarian economist who campaigned literally carrying a chainsaw, promising to dismantle the state. What follows remains genuinely uncertain. Yet Buenos Aires endures as one of the world's great cities. Its literature, cinema, theatre, and intellectual life speak to a nation that has always taken the inner life seriously, even when everything else is falling apart. And perhaps that is the only honest way to end this. Not with a resolution, but with a feeling. The Andes at dawn, children playing football in a dusty street, an old couple dancing tango alone in a kitchen, needing no audience, no occasion, a gaucho watching the last light leave the sky, Buenos Aires glittering from above, restless and alive. Argentina has long waited for the moment when everything finally comes together, but perhaps that is the wrong way to look at it. What Argentina has always been is the in-between, the struggle, the music made without a stage, the dance performed when there is nothing else left to do. Tango was born in the dirt and became the most intimate, most demanding, most beautiful dance in the world. A couple moves together on cobblestones at night. No crowd, no spotlight, just the music and the movement and each other.
Argentina, heart of the South,